Okay, and I'm gonna put a little timer for me. All right, I'm actually very happy to be here. We're like starting off the first Celo All Core Dev Call, and we have a lot of exciting stuff on the agenda for today. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here and help us out to determine the future of the Celo protocol and platform. Yeah, so while we get started, let me see if I can share my screen. Actually, yeah, I don't know if it's working, but yeah, if you haven't seen the agenda yet, let me just put the link here, and we're gonna go over the item that we have so far.
Yes, do you want me to share it for you? I can do
Yeah,
it.
if that would be really helpful. Yeah, so the items on the agenda for today, first we're gonna be doing a client team check-in with the lead rep of the client team, and then we're gonna talk about the CIP uh, 0000, the seller improvement proposal process, and that will be the proposal that would kickstart the whole process for the CIP and for the all core dev call moving forward.
I just wanted to clarify. So originally I thought the issue that we were pushing back really about someone supposed to the our data, but then it sounds like it actually needs the Cognight budget data.
Hey, Membros, can you mute?
You want to mute?
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So after we're gonna go over it together, the seller improvement proposal process. And after that, we're gonna talk about electing new CIP editors. We're gonna go over what the role of the editor is, and then I'm gonna go over the pull request for the CIP template, the new CIP template. And after that, we're gonna talk about the initial discussion of the Celo hard port that we call Donut. And then we're gonna start scheduling, scheduling the future ACD call. After that, we're gonna go over, some proposals on the CIP side, CIP 10, CIP 20, and CIP 21. We're gonna go over what they are, and there's links further for them. Let me just close my Slack, sorry, folks. And then after that, we're gonna go over the governance proposals. The CGP 14, which is the CUSD reward, and CGP 11, which is the post-mortem report. We're gonna start with the client team check-in. Mariano, I believe you're on the call. Just want to roll call for Mariano as a representative. Awesome. So Mariano's representing the client team for Celo blockchain. Now we're gonna go over the seller improvement proposal. If you don't have a link to it, here it is. I'm not gonna go over everything in detail because we're not necessarily gonna activate it immediately. We're gonna give it a day or two for, to give people time to read it and stuff. But the idea is it borrows a lot from the EIP process, and before that from the BIP process, and which is the Bitcoin improvement proposal and the Ethereum improvement proposal. And before them, it started off with the Python improvement proposal process as an inspiration for this. And the whole idea here is allowed us to start specifying the Celo protocol in a way that makes sense on every layer of the protocol, whether it's on the different kind of standards track for the protocol and stuff like that, which we're going to go over. One thing to note here is for the seller improvement proposal process, we want it to follow the seller community tenant and is subject to the code of conduct. So participating in the seller improvement proposal process, follows the community tenant and the code of conducts. Now let's go over the CIP types. So we have the main important one is the standard crack CIP. And that defines anything that's happening on the seller protocol. And we are categorizing them by different rings. And so, James came up with a definition of rings, I think inspired by the Linux kernel definition as a protection ring, which is also linked on the document. So like rings 0 and 1 or anything that are touching the Celo blockchain itself and the core contracts as well. Ring 2 and 3 are more for things that are like, you know, essential services, but they're not really affecting consensus of Celo. So for example, DEP P2P on ring 2 and on ring 3 is what we call the CRC, which is the Celo request for comments, which is based on ERC, Ethereum request for comments. Like if you ever heard of an ERC20, ERC20 would go under ring 3 because it's just like a best practice is kind of like, you know, token standard that doesn't really impact Celo's consensus or the way it works. And that's for the standards. Outside of the standards, we have two other ones, Meta CIP, which we are gonna be, which like the CIP document itself is a Meta CIP. And so Meta CIP describes the process which we can do things. At the same time, it can be a CIP document that hosts multiple standards. For example, let's say we're drafting a hard fork document that will fall under a Meta CIP, and that's the one that we're going to be using to specify different hard forks and what's going on in the hard fork, etc., as we reach consensus as a community for the hard fork. The other one is an informational CIP and just provides like general guidelines or information about how to do things within the Celo community, but it's not necessarily a new feature for the Celo protocol itself. It's better like if you ever want to propose a CIP that it's all like, you know, the CIP contains one single idea. And if you have multiple ideas, you can create multiple different CIPs and stuff. And the CIP author, like if you ever want to propose a CIP, you are the CIP author and you're the one who's going to be championing the links and stuff like that. So let's go over the workflow. The workflow, shepherding a CIP.
Hey, Yas, quick question. Do you want to share your screen?
Let me see. It wasn't working before.
If you make me a co-host, I can share it as well.
Sorry, how do I make you a co-host?
Go to my picture and click on the dots and say make co-host.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that was easy. Sorry, I'm not a Zoom expert, as they say. All right, awesome. Right, so shepherding a CIP. So the champion or CIP author, as we call them, is the person who's in charge of shepherding the CIP. And like the idea is, if let's say you have an idea, right? You're like, oh, you know, I think this would be a great proposal for the CIP, for Celo itself. Normally what you can do before you draft the CIP and submit it, you should probably like vet your idea if it makes sense or not, you know, talking to the community, maybe writing a forum post, you know, talking on Discord with other stakeholders and stuff like that. And that will, you know, inform you on the idea, whether it makes sense or not. If it's the ring 0, ring 1 classification, which falls more on the core protocol side, rather like under like the thing that affect consensus, it's generally advisable to like do a little bit more research and stuff into your proposal. If it's ring 2 or 3, like let's say you're defining a new ERC20 alternative and stuff, generally like, I mean, because it's not something affecting the consensus, it's generally something that, you know, it wouldn't require too much coordination effort, but rather you still need to vet it just to make sure it makes sense from a technical standpoint. So let's see, Deepak, can you scroll a bit to the second section? Yeah. So for ring 0 and ring 1, so they have a definition called final, which would define like, and when we reach the final status, it means that the Celo blockchain, whose lead rep right now is Mariano, has implemented it in the client and it has been activated on mainnet. And that's when the status of a CIP goes to final. It's similar to how Ethereum does EIPs. They go to final after a hard fork, we move the status to final. We have a thing called rough consensus, and it's not really originated at Celo, but rather at the IETF that's used by multiple blockchains, where we decide rough consensus on a specification going into the Celo blockchain together as a working group, because essentially what the all core dev call is a community working group that decides on what can go into like the Celo's platform or not. So yeah, you're the champion of that CIP. Like let's say you want some major change in Celo, you have to champion it, and you have to work towards getting rough consensus. And if you're not sure how, like I'm here to help, and we can go over that as well later. So how is the process happening? So first we have it as like a work in progress for ring 2 to 3. That's the status of your first document as you're still drafting it. We don't merge a work in progress until it becomes a draft. Like we make sure that you have a final draft, like a rough draft. It doesn't have to have like a final spec, and then we can merge it and stuff like that. Merging something into the repository doesn't mean that it's accepted or anything like that. It means it's just a draft that people can take a look at and refer to more, and then we can still refine it and stuff like that together. And for ring 2 and 3, because it doesn't really affect rough consensus and consensus mechanism on Celo, we have a process where we can talk about it, and if it generally people are okay with it, we move it from draft to last call. And last call for ring 2 and 3 can take a week, maybe 2 weeks and stuff like that. After that, it would go to final after the last call period. It goes to final if there's no like contention against that specific proposal and stuff like that. Then it goes to final, and then that becomes like something that's included in the Celo protocol. For ring 0 to 1, or like in non-standard CIP, like a meta CIP for the hard fork, we go from idea to draft stage. We merge it in draft stage as long as it follows the template. And after draft stage, once we go over everything, everyone agrees, rough consensus is reached, we move it to last call. Last call for here can take 2 weeks. And once it's in last call, it goes after last call into accepted stage. After accepted stage is when we can start implementing it for the hard fork and stuff. So we do the testing, we start working on the technical implementation, we make sure all our technical assumptions make sense. After accepted, when all that hard fork coordination process happened and it becomes final, we change the status to final. Other exceptional statuses that we have is active. Active is super important because this is what the CIP process is going to be like. It's going to be an active status. And it's going to be the thing that we're going to start activating together today in order to continue moving on with specifying the CIP process and specifying Celo platform. So here's extra information about what belongs in a successful CIP. We have a preamble, an abstract, motivation, specs, rationale. There's all information that you can review about what to include in it, and we can have a template as well to go over it and stuff. Deepak, can you scroll down a bit? Right. So yeah, just keeps after the header template preamble. Yeah, so here's an example on like the header itself, what the author, resolution discussions do. Discussion is basically, let's say you have to have a link to where you want to discuss the points of a CIP. It can be, you can open a GitHub issue, or it can be on, create a forum post, and we have a link where we can follow the discussion happening for that specific proposal. And like the other things are categories like, is it like a standard stack? If it's not a standard stack, and then like, exceptional ones like superseded or replaces. Let's say if your proposal, there's another proposal that, adds on to it, and you agree, and community goes with the other proposal, while this one is, let's say in last call, it can become superseded by the other newer proposal. Transferring CIP ownership is something that, if like we have, there should be a mechanism to like, if you don't want to champion your CIP anymore and somebody else wants to champion it, would be something that, can be worked out, where we transfer and you add a new author onto the new CIP. So currently, the proposal has me and James Prestwich as the CIP editors. I believe Meta from C-Lab as well expressed interest in being a CIP editor, but here's the point where I would want to come back to you, the Celo community, and wonder if anyone from within the community would want to be a CIP editor. Before I ask that question, I just want to go over what the responsibilities are. And basically, all you're doing as a CIP editor is when there's something being proposed as a pull request, like whether it's a CIP pull request or anything, we just have to make sure that it follows the template guideline. We're not looking at whether the proposal makes sense or not. That's for what the calls are for, to determine what consensus on the proposal. But it's mostly to make sure that your proposal is at least technically makes sense, and making sure the grammars are fixed, and if there's any grammar problems or anything, the formatting, like if you're following the preamble style guide and all of that. And at the same time, we would be assigning a CIP number to your pull request, and send message back to the CIP author with the next step. So it's very low key in terms of work, because you're not really determining whether, this proposal shouldn't make it to Celo. You're not looking at that. You're just looking to make sure that the proposal follows the template guideline and we're assigning a number. And if you're not really sure about getting started as an editor, you can just always ask me any questions and stuff. And I'm always here to help. And you can just learn about by watching what James and I are doing, and it becomes easier down the road. So yeah, I want to take it back to the community for a second to see if there's anybody interested from the community to be, volunteer as an editor along with us for the CIP process.
Also, I think it can be that you don't have to make a decision now. You can always reach out to yours at a later point and read through this.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is something where on each proposal you might call for editor assistance rather than having sort of a formal member of the community is always an editor forever sort of situation.
Yeah, the editor role is just more like imagine like you're proofreading, and you're just like an administrative role, but with minimal requirements, rather than someone who's like a gatekeeping in a way, because they can't be gatekeeping proposals and stuff. So we can also discuss if rotation of editors, but historically speaking, from what I've seen in Ethereum and Bitcoin, is because it's an administrative task, it's hard to find people to rotate for that role and stuff. But I think just in the spirit of openness, and this is an open platform for the community, having somebody from the community participate as an editor, I think for Celo itself is a huge major plus. And honestly, if you're worried about doing much at the beginning or the next few months, I don't think it'll require much, because I need to overhaul the whole CIP proposal anyways, and then you can see what I'm doing in my pull requests, and you can base it off that if you're interested. All right, so I guess it'll be me and James for now. With Meta, I think Meta will be added as well. So I just want to bring it back to the community now. If anyone has any questions about the current proposal for the CIP process.
Yeah, I have a question. And sorry if this is maybe a dumb question, but how does this play in with Celo voting?
So yeah, that's a good question. Celo proposal, the CIP process is more for specifying the Celo protocol and standards. Now, from what I understand, we have the Celo governance proposals, right? Mm-hmm. Governance would add, sometimes parameter changes and stuff as a governance submission, like the gas limit change, for example, and stuff like that. So for that, we're determining a separate process for the governance. Which I think we already have one right now, but we're also looking to expand that separately, just the governance side of things. But what we want to do within the CIP process is anytime there's a new governance proposal that would change any parameter for the Celo protocol, like gas limit, we would want to still specify it in the CIP process, just to make sure that we have all the numbers up to date. Because the whole idea is, let's say I'm a new development team, I'm coming into the Celo ecosystem. How do I know how to build Celo protocol, like an alternative to Celo blockchain? Let's say I want to write it in a different language. Well, I should be able to do that just by following the CIP documents available to me, rather than like, you know, and at the same time, the specification of changes allows us to track down bugs easily, because let's say we added a new chain and it's causing a, you know, like a consensus failure. If we don't have it specified in the CIP process, it'll be hard to like, what do you call it? It'll be hard to track down that certain bug because we don't know all the changes happening. But yeah, just to answer your question, it's going to be a separate thing for the governance proposal itself. But if the governance proposal has any parameter changes that affect the Celo protocol, we would include the new parameter changes in a document for all the parameters. And I think, you know, James and I, we discussed this more about, you know, having like a parameter change document that include things from the governance.
So I think my conception here of how this interacts with the governance proposals is that the CIP process doesn't really worry about what money is being spent on. That's kind of for the governance proposals to decide. What we really want to be doing is being a source of truth for what all of these governed parameters are right now and the history of those, which we don't have right now and might be a problem in the future. And we want to have some sanity checks on those parameters. So for each of these things like gas limit that are governed, we should have defined in the CIP process some upper and lower bound for what is safe and reasonable for those. Obviously, we never want governance to set gas limit lower than 1 million. That would be kind of ridiculous. So that's kind of how I see these processes interacting, is we can keep the existing CGP process mostly the same, but we want to have a source of truth and we want to have some sanity checks for it.
Got it. I guess my one question that I have is like, if you know, if the gas limit is, you know, a parameter that, you know, we want to adjust, why would it, like, what is the purpose of having it be done through governance and voting as opposed to this like rough consensus process of lots of different folks chiming in from the technical side?
I don't know. I did not make that decision initially, and I can't speak to the motivation. The reason I would structure it this way now is because it currently is determined via voting.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe like one ask I would have is like, you know, I really like rough consensus. I think it is a great model. I'm a super huge fan, especially for technical issues that really like to understand the implications of is quite challenging unless they're like extremely obvious and simple. I would maybe encourage if there's a way that in which we could be more clear on the delineation between what decisions get made in the governance proposals and like what decisions should be made via this rough consensus process.
Right.
Yeah. Well, right now, you know, we have these parameters that are currently decided by the governance process, right? They're implemented as on-chain contracts and can be adjusted by coin voting. But we don't have a like clear, exhaustive list of what those are and the motivation behind them in any public documentation, right? So I agree with you. I really like rough consensus as a model, especially for in-depth technical issues. Right now, I would like to go out and figure out what all of those things are, what the motivation was for making them governed, what they're currently set to, and then go back and figure out which of them should probably be set by rough consensus instead, and whether there are any additional things we think ought to be set by governance.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, James.
Yeah, one thing I can speak to is that the main reason that the parameters are governable is so that they are adjustable without hard forks. At least that's one way of phrasing it. And so it is a fact that the way of adjusting parameters on chain without hard forks is through governance voting, which requires a quorum of Celo stakeholders. But that mechanism could itself be changed on chain if there was kind of a good proxy for rough consensus in a cryptographically verifiable way, in a sense. So that's kind of definitely an interesting avenue to think of. But the key difference I see between like a change to the Celo client, which requires a hard fork, and a change to a governance proposal, governance parameter, which could be done via hard fork, but can also be done via on-chain transaction, is that the latter allows more flexibility and easier coordination. And so basically, we should definitely continue to leverage that wherever possible. But I'd definitely be very interested to see proposals for how to move lots of parameters to rough consensus kind of models rather than full Celo stakeholder voting.
Yeah, and to kind of echo that, if you think that there is a better way to set this parameter, it would be a great target for a CIP.
I'm already cooking up one CIP. Maybe I'll do another one after.
I would love that.
Yeah, go ahead, Connor. Don't ask some question. Okay. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to add.
I had a question.
Yeah.
It's about the relationship between EIPs that have been approved and Celo. So just as an example, I'm working on merging some upstream code from Geth, and one of them is a new version of the Ethereum protocol that adds ways to propagate transaction hashes instead of transactions, just to save bandwidth. And it's not controversial, it's a very simple thing. But from the specification point of view, or just from the process point of view, I'm wondering whether anything needs to be done when we merging code that implements an EIP that's already been accepted.
Yeah, this is something that we definitely need to go back and do. I think our initial conception of this is that we should have a meta CIP that specifies which EIPs we have implemented and which we have specifically not implemented, and keep that up to date over time. We really want to have a public source of truth for that decision and when and why it was made.
Or if you look at the agenda, it's a good question you asked. One of the things we want to talk about is adding meta CIP for activated Ethereum-based forks, and that falls under the specification thing because it allows us to track down what went into the Celo blockchain and how do we how do we specify it and stuff like that. And that one doesn't have to go through rough consensus and stuff if it's already been activated. So we would just have to for what I'm hoping for the next call would be I would already have some meta CIP either in draft form or initially specified, and we can go over it with the whole community to agree that these have already been the correct way that we added them into the Celo blockchain, and then we just move them to accepted because they've already been activated. Okay. The other yeah, so okay, so this is the first time we want to reach rough consensus on this. I want to know if everyone is on board with activating this new proposal process for the new Celo improvement proposal process.
Have folks had time to review it themselves yet?
Yeah. So what I'm for what I would recommend, if we have some rough consensus on moving forward, what would that mean is I would make it. I would move it as a pull request to last call. For 2 days, or if you guys want till Monday, where we can leave it in last call. And if there's any, issues with it, we can have discussions on a forum and stuff where you can voice your concern. Oh, I would prefer if we modify this, and then we can revisit and revisit it again and stuff like that. So last call is just something if you prefer, or just like a review period. And if you find any issues with it, we move it back to draft and it doesn't get activated.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know how other folks think about it, but I haven't had time to really process it. It's my first time seeing this, and I'm not going to be able to review it by Monday.
Do you prefer a week or two in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just love to take I don't want to be a blocker for this. I would love to see if other folks have had time to review this, and if anybody feels strongly one way or the other. But my ask would be like if we could have maybe a couple of more days past that, and then I can like slot in some time to give it some thought and provide some feedback.
Yeah. I'm happy to do it, add it for another week or maybe until like, the review period and by the next all core dev call, if that's one thing that we can explore. It's just up to, everyone as well. Like when we, put the last call end date.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that sentiment that giving more time, because these are like governance changes, and the more time we take, the better. And also it's like something new that we've not seen before, giving people time and distributing the documents with everybody, I think helps.
I agree that a week or two is probably reasonable. I would kind of push back on this being governance changes. We already have these processes internal at C Labs, like they already exist. Changes go through a review process. It's just poorly specified and poorly documented and private. The goal of like the CIP process is not to slow things down or change things. It's to bring it out to something that is documented and public.
Yeah, so here's my proposal and we'll see how everyone feels about it. Let's give it a week until next Thursday as the last call date. And if there's no objection by Thursday, we move it from last call to activated. If there's any objection, please let me know. And we can extend it if that's.
And in terms of venue, yes, do you think that the CIP channel in the Discord would be a good place for that?
Yes, I think the CIP, if there's any, I know we have a lot of channels on Discord, but if there's one channel we would like to have, would be the CIP channel on Discord. I think that would be a great place to start.
Wait, can I actually make an ask there?
Yeah.
So, and this is like from experience working on other protocols and also with Celo. In Discord, it is extremely difficult to follow the conversation. And there's no like search is trash. Like you're not gonna, like unless you're willing to like, essentially manually review it yourself and try to find things. But you might not even know that it's happening. If it's at all possible, I'd love it if you could like have maybe kind of like one-off questions or comments in Discord, but like if people could leave their thoughts somewhere, like either as a GitHub issue or like in a forum post, something that we can like review and bounce off of.
That's a great idea, Victor.
Yeah, I'd love that too. I can't follow Discord at this point. There's just too much stuff going on.
Oh, I totally agree. I can't follow it either. There's so much information. How about this? What if I create a forum post for the CIP process, right? Like after this call, and that will be, the place where you can leave a review. And I'll put it part of the Celo mail, Signal mailing list, and I'll send it, in case anyone, doesn't find that link or anything like that. So just to keep everything within the forum post, and if you, that way, you have place to track down all the comment and feedback if there, there are any. Okay.
Works for me.
All right, cool. I'm gonna write a note here. Move CIP 0000 to last call. End date 1 week from ACD. And forum post to give feedback. Okay. Are there any further comments on the CIP process? I think, we sort of like, unless anyone has any objection, I feel like we sort of achieved some sort of rough consensus, at least on the last call 1 week from now with a forum post. Okay. So I'll take silence to mean we can, cautiously move forward. One other thing is,
hey, there is a comment in the Zoom chat. Somebody is requesting, could we use discourse.org?
Yeah. It's Deepak. I think forum.celo.org is a discourse software. So it's already there. Like the forum actually is based on discourse template.
Okay, Andrew, does that answer your question? Yeah, we can.
Cool. Yeah, so the other thing is I'm going to be adding meta CIPs for activated Ethereum-based forks based on, or, what Or's comment was earlier. And these meta CIPs are only for the previous implemented changes into Celo that were based on Ethereum forks. And obviously there's a little bit modification happening on Celo blockchain for these forks, like, so this is the one thing I want to bring for the next meeting, like the next awkward deck call, where we can go over like what has been sent as a meta CIP and stuff. And then, assuming by then we have time to activate the process, these can be, we can go over it together, then I can make a pull request to move them to accepted, to final, because, they're already been implemented. With that, we can move forward to the next item on the agenda, which is the Celo hard fork, and talking about the Celo hard fork. So we decided on a name for the Celo hard fork based on community feedback. It's going to be called Donut, which is awesome, And yeah, so I want to take this time to discuss, initial thoughts and idea about what's going on to the hard fork. I believe. I think, James, correct me if I'm wrong, the BLS precompiled, is it CIP 10 or CIP 20, the one that's included?
It's not CIP 20.
It's CIP 10, right? Oh. Let me double check. Just the general account signer authorization. Hold on. Oh, I think it was assigned CIP 20 for extensible precompiled for hash functions. Would that be something that, to be proposed for the hard fork?
Yeah, so CIP 20 is mine. That's proposed for the hard fork. It's relatively simple, and we can go over it another time if we're pressed for time.
Okay. Yeah, we have. I put it for 90 minutes, and like our call, so we have another 45.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, we can go over it and stuff. Let me just see CIP 10. What was CIP 10 again? Who proposed it? It was.
I can talk to it.
Nam. All right, cool. Nam, you want to go over CIP 10?
Yes. So if you may all know, Celo has an accounts abstraction in the account smart contract. And as part of that, it allows accounts to delegate functionality to other keys. Specifically, it allows other keys to be acting as vote signer, validation signers, and attestation signers. The idea being that the account key is the key that moves, that can move funds, but other keys can kind of be less privileged in that regard and just do one specific functionality. So if they are compromised, they cause less havoc on the system. I think over time, we have noticed that there are two issues of that. So one, there are more applications that could benefit from a vote like signer authorization. And that could be very useful for applications across the board and also to reuse signers. So one example of that would be for, let's say, the metadata feature basically piggybacks on top of these signers, but really it would be beneficial for a signer to be specifically authorized for that functionality. And then secondarily, the way you authorize signers is by way of a proof of possession, which requires a signer to actually be an externally owned account because it has to provide a signature. And so the proposal in CIP 10 is to basically generalize that signer authorization and make it also applicable to smart contracts to be signers. And yeah, there's some conversation and implementation by a community member, KP already. But yeah, just wanted to bring it up in this forum.
And would it be a change that would require a hard fork?
It would not, no. It would be a smart contract upgrade of the account smart contract.
So a significant governance proposal.
Correct. Yes, the account smart contract is ultimately the abstraction that does that both the lock gold and the governance contract uses to inform, of course, who is eligible to vote, or like not who's eligible to vote, but like how much voting power people have. And so it is a significant change in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. So it probably falls into like ring 1 then.
I think that makes sense to me.
Cool. I think next steps for me would be to spend a little more time reviewing the proposal. It seems like upfront to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I remember last time I looked at this, there was a lot of details that need to be worked out. Like there's a lot of, it's like a really great initial idea, and we need to flesh out exactly what that looks like, including the deployment plan. Because as it is, this feature would affect a large number of the core contracts. And that's okay if we have a good rollout plan, or we can refactor it to be backwards compatible as well. But no matter, either way, if we do it, just my general feedback so far is that there's a lot of details to fill in, and then we should kind of, after we do that, basically we could propose it for last call and then further down the process.
Yep, for sure. I very much recognize it's a deep change that I think needs as many eyes as possible on it. I will say I think the change will be made backwards compatible, so it should not, like the semantics of the API of other contracts to accounts should not change.
Yeah.
I have a question. Maybe I missed it somewhere. What is last call? We keep referring to last call. Can somebody explain to me?
Last call means like, let's say we move from draft, we have a draft that's ready. People are like, okay, this draft makes sense on everything that, we discussed. And, we tested the assumption, we have, all that thing going, and there's a rough consensus, at least on the technical specification. Last call was just a review period where it's like, okay, that's the last call, after this, if nobody says anything, it's going to go to activated, or no, accepted, sorry. And so it's just like a way of saying this is a review period that ends within either a week, 2 weeks, a few days, depending on how big of a change it is and stuff. But yeah, that's the gist of the last call.
Last call is when a CIP moves from default rejected to default accepted. So we have done review, we've decided we want that feature, we have rough consensus to include it, and we are in the final review where only a problem with the CIP will cause it to be not implemented.
Maybe a question on top of that is, so when in that part of the process, like, do you present it here, or what would be the appropriate forum to do so? Like
the all core devs call, one of the like business matters we will be working on each call is which CIPs do we have rough consensus on, and which of those are ready to be moved from draft to last call. So the correct place to present all of these things is GitHub first, and then talk about them on the all core devs calls.
So maybe a follow-up question on that. Does that mean that like CIP 10, let's say, like, I don't know, I guess specifically how rough consensus would work, but does it sound like we don't have the requirements to get to rough consensus right now with CIP 10?
Personally, I would like to see some more specification and to understand it a little better. I will spend some time on that this week.
Gotcha. Is that usually, I guess, should we generally expect those CIPs to receive that treatment prior to the call, or kind of as part of like basically just like one mention doing one call where you kind of everyone's on the same, like knows that this exists, and then maybe on the next call you move it to last call?
I think for relatively uncontroversial changes, that should be the case. The all core dev call agendas are going to be set in the week leading up to it. So get something on the agenda. We should try to make sure that people review things that are on agenda in advance of the call. For more controversial changes or for things that require very in-depth specification, I would expect that it takes a longer time and that people are developing them and updating ACD in parallel for like several weeks.
Right.
So what you're saying is that like if we have the agenda in advance for like 1 week at least, you could then use that week to review the CIP 10, for example, in this case. So we can use the time here to actually discuss final details and like achieve rough consensus.
Yes, this will go much smoother if everyone, including me, shows up prepared.
And what I noticed as well, CIP 10 right now is in work in progress status. Is it still a WIP? Like, is everything specified, and can we move it to draft stage, or is it still in work in progress right now?
I would say we should probably actually clean it up before we can officially call it draft. So I'll work on that.
Yeah, so before we even move to last call, we have to move it to draft status because it's like there's like a bunch of things that, you know, based on what you said, needs to be implemented or cleaned up. So yeah, after that, we'll move it to draft status, and that would give us time to review it and make sure that, you know, the technical assumption of the chain makes sense. And then after that, we'll move it to last call for 2 weeks. Because it's a ring one, we need more, you know, like it needs a little bit more time for revision. And then after that, you know, we can move it to accepted if there's no contention on the proposal itself.
And, you know, to be clear, moving from draft to last call is pretty much the only thing that requires a rough consensus. Before that, you can move from whip to draft, no problem. That's the editor's responsibility, is to make sure that does happen. After that, moving from last call to accepted is the default thing at a certain date.
Right. And let's say during accepted, we find a technical vulnerability or misspecification or something that would cause a serious issue to the proposal itself, then we move it back from accepted to draft. And we repeat the whole process because, you know, if it's something that is affecting the core level of the Celo platform, we want to, you know, be cautious and, you know, in the way that we add those changes and stuff. So
May I ask,
yeah.
What is meant by rough consensus? Does that mean that we just discuss in this call and provided there's no apprehensions, it moves from draft to last call?
Yeah, so it's like, imagine like rough consensus is defined by the IETF, the Internet Task Force, as when you have a working group, having rough consensus on the technical specification that's going into a platform. The general gist is 51% is not rough consensus, and 99% agreement is way better than rough consensus. So it's like it falls between 51 to 99%. And let's say somebody has an apprehension or something about what's going into this call, but it's not really a technical apprehension rather than like something else. It might affect rough consensus, like we can't maybe move forward. But if it's like a security vulnerability and somebody's pointing it out, and then that would not, you know, move rough consensus forward. So it's only when we all agree that the proposal is, you know, technically sound is when we can determine rough consensus among all of us.
And, you know, this is kind of deliberately left by the IETF a little loosely defined, right? Is the goal is to make the social structure that wants all of this to succeed and where everybody is working towards the same goal. And if we're all doing that, we're going to reach rough consensus fairly easily. The goal is not to like make a process that blocks updates, it's to make sure that everybody understands the update and why we're doing it.
Okay. Yeah, so regarding CIP 10, I don't want us to dwell too much on it right now because it's not even in draft status yet. So if there's more discussion, like if people are more interested in a discussion, we can schedule a breakout room call just for CIP 10. But I don't see the need to do it now, potentially maybe later if more people have questions, or if not, we can cover it in the next ACD call. Before we move to CIP 20, I want to say that for the next call, the reason I put the Celo hard fork as one of the items on the list is by the next call, I'm going to be proposing a meta CIP that would specify the donut hard fork. And it's all going to still be in a draft stage because we haven't yet decided what goes on to in that specific meta CIP, and that will be like the draft document that we're going to keep on updating as we go on through the ACD call and determine what goes into the donut hard fork. So I just wanted to bring it up. Like for next time, I'll be coming up with a meta CIP for donut. That's just going to be a draft, and we're going to use it as the single source of truth for the donut hard fork. Right. So next on the agenda is CIP 20. James, you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So CIP 20 is a relatively simple precompile. One of the things that application developers need on Ethereum fairly often is different cryptographic primitives, different signature algorithms, hash functions, and currently it's very difficult to get those included. Even though the technical changes are relatively low risk because you have to navigate the entire CIP, the entire EIP process, reach core dev consensus around it. The goal of CIP 20 is to provide, a bunch of different hash functions under one umbrella. We would like to have Ketchak 256 and Ketchak 512 and SHA-3 and SHA-3 512 and maybe SHA-2 512. We'd like to have Blake 2, and we currently have one of those. So CIP 20 is a precompile that accepts a selector and arguments and computes a cryptographic hash. It's just for smart contracts. It's just an added feature, and it is extremely low technical risk because all of these are well-defined cryptographic hash functions. Any questions about it?
How do you define the gas cost here for all this?
I have not yet defined gas costs. Typically, the way these have been done is benchmarking on some hardware, targeting a specific number of gas process per second. The Ethereum process here is not very rigorous, and it tends to be set by feel. And I'd like to come up with a bit more of a defined process for it for CIP 20. These hash functions should be extremely cheap to execute. I kind of want to deliberately exclude things like scrypt or ethash that would be expensive. But I have not defined a gas metering system yet.
Cool. Yeah, to me, seems like a great thing to add. The only concern or things to solve, not concern, is that again, define a good way to meter gas and make that again, not a way for someone to get to do expensive things very cheaply, right? If we get.
So I think the details of any specific hash function for this are less important to me. The CIP is mostly about how we add new hash functions to this set. And I would like to see kind of a reduced CIP process for that, where we default accept hash functions that aren't expensive, that are computationally cheap, that are pure functions, that are well specified already, and that can be benchmarked, like through a standard process. So between like this call and next call, I would appreciate it if anyone could give feedback on like the proposed governance process for CIP20, like the proposed review process for new hash functions.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to provide additional feedback on that. Obviously, it's kind of interesting because you will still need to include it in a hard fork to get it deployed.
Yes.
And so basically, I imagine that we still be have some kind of like meta CIP or otherwise that records all the hash functions that are being added and which ones are finalized and accepted and added and so on and so forth.
Yep.
But long story short, I'll be happy to review this again, once again.
Yeah, I would love like feedback or suggestions on how to do that. Right now I have a separate CIP20 folder to which I will be adding specifications for each of these things. And I have a table in the main CIP that references, that compiles like what I think should be in the first version of this. But as far as updates go, I would love suggestions on, how you think those should be managed.
Yeah, sure. I think I will echo Mariano's comment that like part of the process should define what the benchmark is for gas estimation. Just that way it's not a question on every single proposal. I think it's probably the most contentious issue with any new addition as well. Or at least the most contentious generalized issue.
Definitely. And for hash functions, especially because of this like kind of weird obsession with memory hard hashes in crypto, a lot of them are egregiously expensive when run as a pure computation. And I would like to really, really avoid those and have some very strict gas benchmarking set up in order to prevent people from doing outrageously expensive things very cheaply.
Yeah, I imagine that a good gas benchmarking setup should de facto ban memory hard hashes and other expensive hash functions. And then, or we can also additionally explicitly ban memory hard hash functions. I'm sure that people will show up with examples of hash functions that are like somehow on the line. Can't think of it in the moment, but I'm sure some will find a counterexample.
If inside the CIP itself, I have an explicit list of things I think should be banned. So like non-pure functions, things that aren't already available from Go, things that aren't standardized. So I definitely like, if you have things you think should be on that list that should like ban specific functions, I'd love to hear about those too.
The one question I have as well is, will Blake 2xs be included as part of the CIP or be just the first to go through the new governance process?
I am a little torn on that. So I have like a sample implementation that has the catch-X and the SHA-3s just in a branch locally that I need to push up. For Blake 2 XS, it's motivated specifically by Plumo. And so I would like to get it in the first hard fork, and I don't have a strong opinion on whether it should be, part of the CIP20 or whether it should be activated, like by rough consensus following CIP20.
I have an implementation question. So if this one precompile can support many different hash functions, would all those hash functions have the same gas cost?
No. So the way precompiles are defined in the code, there's essentially a gas metering function that accepts the input of the precompile and returns a gas cost. And so we can have arbitrary gas calculation based on which of the hash functions it is invoking. And I think we should.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I didn't read this, so maybe I don't know if we want to discuss it or maybe first read it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that pops up is that, so I guess by having a single precompile, like you are making a trade-off between reserving many addresses versus reserving a single address for the precompile to call and then using a selector. So what's the rationale behind that?
The rationale is that I don't know how many of these we're going to want to add, and we have already used about 10% of the precompile address space. So I'd like to bias towards conserving and towards making a like single conceptual group for these things. And there's very little overhead to doing it this way.
Cool. Okay.
It also avoids like merge conflicts and segmentation of the address space, because right now one of the issues we face when merging a upstream is that if they add precompiles, they can collide with precompiles we add, or any number of people could do this kind of thing. So this is one way to ensure that all the hash functions fit into a single contiguous address space or address plus selector space.
The exception to that will, of course, be SHA-2, which is already a precompile, and ripe MD160. The existing hash function precompiles. Anyway, like we've spent a little more time on this than I think it deserves on this core dev call. It's still in draft stage, and I'd love to get more review on it.
Cool. I'll review it as well for the next one, because I saw it like a work in progress and there's a bunch of to-dos and stuff like that. So yeah, I'll give it a review, and by the next all core dev call we can add it to the agenda again, and explore what is missing as well from it, because I noticed there's a bunch of to-dos like benchmarking and all that. Is everyone okay that we move it to the next call as well, just to have time to review it more? Cool. All right, let's move on to governable look back window CIP 21. I believe, was it proposed by NAM? Oh, Andre, my bad.
No. Andres, do you want to present or should I? Or you?
Sure. Yeah, I'll present it. So, well, basically, this is just like the block gas limit. The look back window is now it's proposed to be governable. So it's on chain. You can like set it on chain, and well, basically, validators have been complaining about the window being too short. And it was set on 12 blocks, and that's not a lot of time for like a simple node maintenance. So well, now this proposal is to like make it like a blockchain parameter. So the blockchain would just fetch it from the contract with a static call. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, to add to that, so the loopback window is a parameter that defines how many blocks you can miss on a row. So it's hard coded to 12. So if you miss more than 12 blocks, you are considered down.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's and that's built on your uptime score, which then builds up into your validator score. And so, as Andres was saying, the proposal here is quite simple. It's like we want to make that parameter governable, so we can change that via a CGP, a governance proposal. And it is a hard fork change because it basically change the rules of how you validate blocks.
Gotcha. And if unless I'm mistaken, it also then like because one of the goals stated the community must decide on the value. So that value decision would go within this process, or is it going to be governable within a CGP being submitted for a new value for look back?
We can definitely make the two things separately. So we can, this also implies like a change to the smart contract. So it's basically a change to layer 1, but also a smart contract because we need to add that parameter. And we can initialize that parameter to 12. So in fact, it wouldn't actually change. It will only change the mechanism of how you obtain the number. And then make a governance proposal to change it to another number. So we don't need to, we could, but we don't need to combine both decisions.
Okay. James, if I'm not mistaken, this would be ring 0, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So ring 0 for this one. But the change seemed like, straightforward, where we're not using the look back window from within the base layer. You're just using, you making a call to the smart contract instead. And the value is being decided like potentially later by a CGP being submitted for that value for the look back window.
Right. Yeah. Like I'd consider this quite uncontroversial, even if it's a hard function.
Yeah. I don't think this should be very controversial. I would like to see like a safe minimum and maximum in the CIP. Like is obviously we shouldn't set the look back window to 20 million blocks. So what is the like safe maximum value for it?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We're not trying to. Yeah. We're just trying to make the change in mechanism, but we can add that too.
Yeah.
As a.
It seems like relatively uncontroversial to me, but kind of I would like to set the precedent that whenever we make a parameter governable, we go ahead and document for posterity what you shouldn't do with it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I also have some questions around like edge cases, basically things like, does this also mean that the window of blocks around the epochs is also increasing where downtime is not considered, and various other kind of issues around things like when it's set, when does the new window apply after a governance proposal is another example of a question I have. So basically, I think that there's some edge cases that should be addressed, but I don't have any major concerns. I think that could just be all relatively minor review comments.
So,
yeah,
go
I don't
ahead.
want to chat about that here or like on the PR, but yeah, we definitely can.
So in the interest of preserving time for the other items on the agenda, I say that we can, discuss all these open questions within the GitHub pull request for the governable look back window. I will add an action item, which is that the look back window becomes the parameter chain that we need to document, like James said. Param chain, governable look back window. And I say we just move on for the next item just because we have 15 minutes left. So Nam, you want to give a postmortem report? I'm hoping it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes because we have another item.
Yeah, I was saying maybe if we can go with CC first, and I can do CGP 11 afterwards if there's time.
All right, cool. So CGP 14, which is the CUSD rewards proposed by Emily. Emily, you want to talk about it?
Sure, I can talk about this. Thank you. Yeah, so in summary, the purpose of CGP 14 is to propose the idea of using funds from the community fund to deliver Celo rewards to CUSD holders based on a percentage of their CUSD balance over time for a limited period of time. And before we get into the details of how these rewards are structured, which is a work in progress because we want feedback from the community on that. First, we want to get into the why, which in summary is to incentivize engagement and onboarding onto Celo and the Valora wallet. So C-Labs has been focusing a lot on Valora lately and the payment use case. But if you don't have a lot of other people in your network also using Valora, there may not be a big reason to come and engage with the app. And there's also been a lot of talk around the community fund lately, how to organize stewardship around it and to leverage it to potentially increase Valora adoption. So we thought that using some of the community fund to reward CUSD holders could be a great way to encourage engagement on the platform, to bring people back and to help people grow their networks. If there's more people onboarding and using, it becomes like a more viable payment option to use in your everyday life. So yeah, so that's kind of the why of this CGP. So some of the key parameters, I guess, because yeah,
Can you discuss the why in a bit of detail?
Sure.
I have some questions about that, and especially just before we get into the parameters. I think that's kind of the first place to start.
Yeah.
And I think that on the why, there's an assumption there that providing rewards will essentially incentivize people to use the payments use case, which I think is maybe not, I don't quite see the connection myself. I think that what we've seen from DeFi is that people will use DAI for like yield farming, for instance.
Yeah.
But that does not make DAI a more viable payments platform.
Yeah. I think the connection there that I made is it goes back to how, having your network using the wallet. We figure that first of all, if people are getting rewards, it gives you a reason to come back to the wallet to claim them, to keep track of your balance, but it might also incentivize other people to want to own CUSD. And the best way to do that is through the Valora wallet. So if you want to use a Valora wallet to make payments in CUSD, it's easier if you have friends to do that with. And so this would be kind of incentivizing people to, evangelize and get people interested, and, create another reason to get interested in Celo to come on and try the application, which would then, if the network grows, you have more people on there that would accept a payment in that way, especially if they'd earned some yield on it.
Yeah. And for a bit more context, I think that this idea came out of internal user growth and adoption stuff. So just people at C-Labs trying to think about how to get more people using Celo. And I don't know if most of the people, the reasoning behind it, the people who came up with the idea are on this call.
Right.
Yeah, and because this is asking the Celo community to fund this proposal, I would definitely love to see a lot of that rationale and research displayed prominently as part of the why for people for the community to approve this distribution of funds. And at the same time, it's also true that the interests of the Celo community are to grow Celo, which obviously we at C-Labs strongly believe is linked to the growth of Valora, but is only a secondary goal in the minds of the community. I'd say the primary goal here should be to improve the adoption and usability of the Celo network, and not necessarily the Valora app itself, although obviously we believe the Valora app is one of the best ways to grow the Celo network.
Yeah, and ideally this would be something that would be accessible, to third-party wallets and other things in the network to kind of piggyback on as well.
Just from a bit of a process question, this isn't going to end up being ring 001 or interact with the CIP process very much. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct. I don't know if anyone else's input.
So yeah, because the way I understand it is it's going from the community fund, right? Which is a separate smart contract, and using the community fund itself to fund the CUSD rewards, which doesn't really touch any of the Celo platform. It's just how we, allocating from the smart contract itself. Okay.
Yeah, I believe governance would just have to vote the transfer, and governance owns that, owns the community fund.
Yeah.
Cool. That seems fairly straightforward. We can go through normal governance channels. Awesome.
All right.
So then I guess the goal here essentially would be to have the technical review of the mechanism, and then any review of the motivations could be segmented off into the Celo governance governance process / the Celo community fund governance process.
Yeah,
hearing?
I think if we would like there to be a standardized mechanism for doing that is reusable, potentially for other people in the future too. That would be a good choice for like a CRC or another like informational doc in the proposals repo, and that the CGP, we don't need to like spend a huge amount of time on the CIP call talking about. I'm not trying to shut down the discussion. I want to make sure that it happens with the right people in the most effective place.
Right. Yeah. I think like we included some governance proposals within this call because just to determine the technical implementation and whether it touches core or not. I think what we're doing for the governance stuff, I'm in talks with folks who might be interested in expanding and improvement, or just like basically defining the governance process. And then that would make sense to make it separate from the CIP call if it's not really touching any of the rings that we outline and stuff. But yeah, I think for this CIP itself, I think like based on feedback that I'm hearing, there should be more research on the why and whether it makes sense. And is there anything else I missed from feedback?
It might be cool if we want to standardize this mechanism that we come up with. And that would be a great thing to talk about on, like the UCD calls in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think until we have a new governance call, I added governance, items on the governance at the end just to, everyone feels included and stuff. All right, so it seemed that
I did want to add on to this proposal was like, have we decided or thought about, hey, we are making this proposal, like maybe we'll go back in time and look at people's usage. Also, this itself could be an incentive for people to come and use CUSD. So maybe if we can publicize this a little more and say, hey, we're doing this till X, like maybe like November 30th or something like that, like having a future date, that would give some people to like, hey, I want to be part of this and see. Of course, that can also make people to do like civil attacks, but I think using this, like I don't know how many people we have right now, but we can use this as well to get more people on.
Yeah.
And it will require you to have your phone number verified, which at least tampers that a bit.
Yeah, so we already had a governance call before to go over CGP 11 and a new core contract release. Maybe we can publicize it, like Deepak said, for CUSD reward to have it more of that. And yeah, we can just make it in parallel. I don't want it to be like the CIP process is not really including CGP, because there's many CGPs that do touch on parameter changes, like the governable look back window would require at least that, the assumptions are correct on that. How many minutes do we have? We have 5 minutes. Nam, you want to wrap it up with the post-mortem report on CGP 11?
Yes, can do that.
Can we wrap up? So I guess I want to just clarify the understanding of what the takeaways from our conversation on CIP 21 is. And my understanding is just that, like, basically, we should review the technical details here as our core devs, or just basically, we should still review the technical details here as we would for a CRC. But otherwise, all the motivation and decision on whether or not to activate it will go through the CGP process. Is that understanding correct?
I think that's correct. My take here is that this call is for things that are in, rings 0 through 3, right? We're talking about technical changes that either need to be treated as critical software updates, ring 0 and 1, or as community-driven standards, rings 2 and 3. The technical aspects of this, in as much as we want to standardize them, should definitely be discussed here. The voting aspect and the parameterization aspect maybe belong in a different venue.
Wouldn't we want to document the parameters that bring propose and stuff?
It depends on in my view, and I'm not the ruler here. In my view, whether or not we want to document those parameters kind of depends on whether they're an ongoing thing that affects chain operation, or whether they're an ongoing standard for technical things.
Cool.
I think that the CGP and the governance definitely want documentation of those parameters, but it doesn't need to be done on this call.
Okay. So how about this? I'll try to schedule another governance call that outside of CIP call just for the why of the CGPs being proposed. And, I can take that with the community and stuff like that. We'll have a similar call to this, but more focused on the why. And if there's any question about technical implementation and standardization, I'll add it to the next agenda on the ACD call and stuff. All good with everyone, or any objection? Okay. So can we move on to the last item, or if anyone has any further comments? Okay. Nam, you want to go over the postmortem for CGP 11?
Yes. So as some of you may be aware, we had an issue where the CGP 11, which was to increase the gas limit to 13 million, included one more zero than was expected, so effectively increasing the limit to 130 million. And that the proposal was proposed and was ultimately found by a community member, Viad, before approvers actually had the chance of approving the proposal. So as a response, approvers were told not to approve the proposal, and then the proposal just didn't make it through. Conversely, on Alpha Horse and Baklava, the test nets, the Seed Labs team took action to reduce the gas limit from 130 million, which is what we tested with before, back down to 13 million. And then we rejected the CGP 13 on the proposals repo and reintroduced the proposal as CGP 12. And it this time actually included 13 million. And as of yesterday, got executed. Oh, I think as of 2 days ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we have some mitigations. One is to, I think the CLI tooling could be a little better about preventing fat fingers. I mean, I think the problem in this case was that the CGP that I wrote, CGP 11, was the one that contained an extra zero. And so I think just more double checking each other, because basically everyone just copy and pasted my value, which is totally reasonable, of course. But ultimately the mistake was mine to add 130 million in the CGP. And so, yeah, that wasn't great. We're hoping also to make, we have some issues in the incident report that we're trying to address to make proposal construction more predictable and easier. And we would also then lock the proposal itself in the CGP. Yeah, and if there's any questions, let me know. Also, we have time.
Yeah, just one question from my end. Nam, is there the report that you made, is it public? Like, can we share it with the community?
Yes, it is public.
Okay, I'll just add it to the like to the agenda link. Can you add it in chat if it's possible?
Yep, we'll do.
Anyone else has any questions for Nam about the incident? Okay.
Maybe one thing that'd be useful here is just like to, I guess, is this going to change the CGP process in any like noticeable way?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, which I guess follows what we just talked about with CGP 14. It feels a little like, yeah, it's very ad hoc, I guess, right now, I would say, right? I think CGPs right now have mostly been proposed by C Labs, and mostly on the C Lab side have been proposed by a very small number of people and aren't really like vetted or reviewed because a lot of people have a lot of things to do. It seems hard to me to recommend any particular action on the CGP side because I think a lot of it is more process around, right? Like people being aware of what's going to happen and actually reviewing things. But certainly, I think on the C Lab side, we're taking measures to being more aware of the CGPs that we are executing on the testnets. One like piece of that would be to have approvers and proposers to be two different people on the testnets.
Sweet. Does that answer your question, Victor? Cool. Anyone had any further comments? We're 2 minutes, few minutes over time, so I want to respect everyone's time and earned it. But if anyone had any other question, please, one last question. Alrighty, seeing where nobody has any more questions. So thank you everyone for taking the time to joining our very first All Core Dev call. This is recorded. We're gonna publish it. I think, like, I need to figure out where it's gonna be published. And I'm gonna write like a little summary of the call within the ticket itself. I'm gonna close the ticket, create a new ticket for the next ACD call, and I'll add that to the Celo Signal calendar. And I'll follow up with that by email and stuff. And if you have any feedback or anything like that, please hit me up on Discord or by email, yaz@clabs.co. And, we can have a conversation about the process. Anyway, wanted to thank you and take care.
Thanks, Yas.
Later.
Thanks, y'all. Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.